Now for our story. It was almost 9:30 in the evening. Angus McKillop walked along a path which wound through the square in Wakefield opposite the courthouse. He'd been summoned to meet someone there at this hour by an unsigned letter. The attorney had no idea whom he was to meet. He only knew the mysterious errand had something to do with Bill Meade's suit for custody of his baby son. He sat down on a bench at the appointed place. And now, a few minutes later, he hears footsteps. Sees the shadowy figure of a woman approaching.
It's Mr. McKillop, is it not?
It is. And who might... Oh, how are you, Miss Ward? But that's wrong. You're Mrs. Ben Calvert now, eh?
Yes, I have been for some time, you know.
Of course, I remember now. Forgive me, but I'm a man who is set in his ways. You were Miss Ward for many years. It'll take me a bit of time to mark the new order in my mind.
Oh, that's all right, Mr. McKillop. Don't apologize. Lots of people still call me Jessie Ward. I don't mind, really. After all, I'm used to the name, too.
Well, then, Mrs. Calvert, I trust you've been in good health.
Oh, yes, quite well, thank you.
And your husband?
Oh, Ben's fine. The only ailment he suffers from is a bad temper. Well, how have you been yourself? We don't see each other often, do we?
No, we don't. I'm busy in my office most of the time. I'm certainly not accustomed to rambling about all hours of the night.
Oh, you ought to take a little stroll in the evening once in a while. It's quite refreshing. At least I find it so.
You don't say?
Yes, indeed. Clears the head, you know.
Well, my head doesn't need clearing. It's as clear as a bell.
Well, you're a lucky man, Mr. McKillop, since you can say that with so much assurance. Yes, most people find life somewhat trying from time to time. Then there's nothing like a quiet walk to help straighten out one's thoughts.
I'd sooner lie abed with a good copy of Bobby Burns' poetry to read and my pipe for company.
Oh, dear. I'm afraid you're a confirmed bachelor, Mr. McKillop.
I am that, but it's nothing to fear, I can tell you. I'd be afraid to be anything else. Well, now if you'll excuse me, Mrs. Calvert, it's been a pleasant little chat we've had, but...
Oh, but you mustn't run off, Mr. McKillop.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Calvert, but I have an appointment, a business appointment.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Mr. McKillop, your appointment is with me.
You?
Yes, certainly.
By the Lord Harry, then why didn't you say so in the first place?
Why, I thought there was no harm in passing the time of day, so to speak. We've plenty of time, haven't we?
Now, you may have. I'm a busy man. So you're the writer of the mystery letter?
Yes.
There's something wrong about this. You, Ben Calvert's wife, making a rendezvous with the very attorney who opposed him. I'm an honest man, Mrs. Calvert, and a frank one.
I know you are. That's why
And I tell you this, I don't like what's going on. Don't like it at all. It's not right.
What's not right, for heaven's sake?
You're Ben Calvert's wife. You've no business mixing up in this thing. Whatever you have in mind.
Well, I'd like to know why not. Just because I'm Ben's wife doesn't mean I'm blind to what's been happening.
Perhaps not, but...
I've a right to my opinions, and I've a right to do something about them. If there's anything I can do...
But for a wife to work against her own husband, that's what it amounts to. This secrecy...
Oh, my goodness, Mr. McKillop, stop talking about wives, husbands. You're an attorney. You ought to know the ways of the world.
I am an attorney, and I know the ways of women. That's why I distrust you.
So, you distrust me, do you? Well, I'm not worried about that. When you've heard what I have to say, you'll change your mind.
I doubt it. I'm not sure I'll stop to listen to your story, whatever it is, Mrs. Calvert.
Oh, but you must. It's to your own interest, and Bill Meade's.
Bill Meade? The man your stepdaughter just divorced. The man who wants their child. And you say you have his interest in mind. Doesn't ring true. No, I think I'll go along. I don't like such shenanigans, thank you.
Now, wait, Mr. McKillop.
Wait? Or what?
Look here. I don't see why I should justify my actions to you, but since you're being so difficult, perhaps if I explain how I feel...
Right is right and wrong's wrong, Mrs. Calvert. You can't explain that away.
Well, I don't intend to try. But the thing is, when you know more about what's in the background, your idea of right and wrong may be changed. If I tell you about Ben...
There's not much you can tell me about your husband. I've known him for years. That doesn't alter my thinking about your actions.
It might, if you'd give me a chance to explain. You see, Mr. McKillop, my relationship with Ben, with my husband, hasn't been a bed of roses by any means.
You might have known that when you married the man.
I suppose I should have. In fact, I did, in a way, but, well, I put my doubts behind me. I loved Ben for years. I guess everyone in town knows about that. I would have done anything for him. I worked hard, helped him all I could. Oh, I knew I was a laughing stock. Everyone said, Ben Calvert will never marry Jessie Ward. He's making a fool of her. I knew that, and it hurt. But somehow I couldn't give up. Then, gradually, my feeling about him changed.
That was the time for you to break it off, then. When a woman turns against a man...
I might have broken it off, but he'd always promised to marry me. I thought he would. And I still wanted him to because I wanted to show this town how wrong it was. Prove I hadn't been made a fool of.
Pride. It's a terrible thing.
And then Kitt came back. Ben told me he couldn't marry me because of his daughter. That was when I determined to get him anyway.
Apparently you did. You accomplished what you wanted, but still you're bitter.
Yes, I am bitter. After the treatment I've had from those two, from Ben and his precious daughter.
So it's spite, then. That's what drives you. I see it now. You want to strike back at Ben Calvert and his daughter through Bill Meade, huh?
Yes, I admit I'd like to hurt them. They've hurt me every way they could. But that's not all of it. Believe me, it isn't. There's a question of justice, too.
Justice?
Yes. I happen to know that Bill Meade hasn't been treated fairly. Don't believe this if you don't want to, but I honestly like that boy. I always have. I felt sorry for him when he married Kitt. I knew there'd be a showdown sooner or later. But I'm not going to stand quietly and let her put things over. Things she has no right to.
I see. Now, Mrs. Calvert, in spite of the fact that I know I ought to have better sense, I have a feeling in my bones that you're telling the truth.
I am.
And if you have information which might benefit the boy's case, I can't refuse it in good faith. He needs help. I said before that short of a miracle or magic, I couldn't do him any good. Perhaps this is it, even though it's a strange, black sort of magic.
Well, it shouldn't matter, black magic or white. As long as he has a fair chance. Knows the things he should know, so he stands a decent hope of winning. Well, it's not as if Kitt loved that baby. I know better.
Aye, that's been well established. But that's not the kind of information which will help us. If that's all you have to say, we're wasting our time. I know, too, that Ben Calvert's no man to rear an innocent babe. But that doesn't help. The child's fed and cared for.
Yes, thanks to the nurse, Miss Thorndyke.
Nurse or no nurse, the bairn's not suffering physically. There's no law that says a woman has to feed her child herself, if she can pay someone to do it for her.
Oh, I know that.
If the ex-Mrs. Meade doesn't neglect her child's needs, sees to it that he has what she should, then, according to the law, she's a fit mother. And the only thing which would make her unfit in the law's eyes would be the charge of conduct on becoming a mother. I think you understand, Mrs. Calvert.
I certainly do. And it's exactly what I came to tell you about.
What's that? You know something which would...
I have definite proof as to Kitt's actions, which leaves no doubt that she's entirely unfit to bring up that child, according to the law.
There was no mistaking the triumph, the confidence in Jessie Calvert's tone. She wasn't bluffing. Angus McKillop realized that. Apparently, she really had, or believed she had, information which might strengthen Bill Meade's case, his suit for custody of the baby boy he believed to be his own. Angus looked intently at Jessie as he waited for her to continue her story. Now for our story.
If the ex-Mrs. Meade doesn't neglect her child's needs, sees to it that he has what he should, then, according to the law, she's a fit mother. And the only thing which would make her unfit, in the law's eyes, would be the charge of conduct and becoming a mother. I think you understand, Mrs. Calvert.
Angus McKillop looked gravely at the woman who sat next to him on the bench. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. The attorney had gone to the square opposite the Wakefield courthouse in answer to an unsigned letter which stated that the writer had important information in connection with Bill Meade's suit for custody of his baby son. He'd been surprised to discover that it was Jessie Calvert, Bill Meade's ex-mother-in-law, who had sent the letter. Now, Jessie returns his gaze with a look of triumph as she says,
I certainly do understand, Mr. McKillop. That's exactly what I came to tell you about.
What's that? You know something which
I
would...
have definite proof as to Kitt's actions, which leaves no doubt that she's entirely unfit to bring up that child, according to the law.
I see. I presume you realize that the charge you're making is a very serious one?
I'm not afraid.
And you're prepared to take the stand on oath to back your statements up?
Oh, no, Mr. McKillop. In spite of what I told you about my present relationship with my husband, I'm not that big a fool. If you should put me on the witness stand, I'd deny everything.
In other words, you want to eat your cake and have it too.
If you mean by that, I'd like Kitt to get what I believe is a fair punishment for what she's done. That I don't mind seeing Ben's pride lowered. You're quite right.
You want all that, but you don't want to expose yourself to their anger. If they know what you've done.
Well, naturally I don't. I have to protect myself, even though I'd like to help Bill get his child.
Being the kind of woman you are, I can understand, Mrs. Calvert. You must protect yourself.
Well, don't most people want to protect themselves?
It appears to be the popular human urge. All right. Suppose you give me the story from the beginning. Tell me exactly what you suspect.
But it's not a question of suspecting. I have definite proof, I tell you.
Very well. Now then, when did you first acquire this knowledge?
Mr. McKillop, are you going to cross-examine me as if I were on the witness stand?
It's the simplest way. People have a tendency to wander from the subject under discussion. Why? Do you object to that method?
No, but it's rather upsetting to have questions shot at you.
You'll get used to it.
Well, if that's the way you want it. I began to suspect that something funny was going on with Kitt a long time ago, while she was in California. That was before the baby was born.
Why?
You mean what made me think something was wrong?
Aye?
Well, it was Kitt's attitude. She was so secretive about her friends there, who she was seeing. After all, a girl like Kitt doesn't go off to Southern California, live all alone without seeing someone.
Exactly where was Mrs. Meade living at the time?
She had this house at the beach outside of Los Angeles, a place called Malibu.
Yeah, I've heard of it. A place popular with the movie folks.
Yes. You see, Ben and I had gone out there to visit after our wedding.
Yeah, honeymoon, eh?
Oh, you could call it that for want of a better name. Kitt was awfully vague about everything. Wouldn't say much. Well, anyway, we left that same night. We were taking the train the next day. In the morning, Ben asked me to get Kitt on the phone. He wanted to say goodbye.
Go on.
The housekeeper answered. She told me Kitt couldn't come to the phone. Then all of a sudden she said, "Wait a minute. I think I see Mr. Cromwell walking on the beach. Would you like me to call him?" Well, I said no and hung up.
Who's this Mr. Cromwell? What's he got to do with it?
Paul Cromwell was an old admirer of Kitt's. Well, in fact, you might say he'd been much more than that. Much closer at one time, when she was in New York. That was what struck me as odd. The fact that Kitt never mentioned he was there, living right next door. She hasn't mentioned it to this day. I know why now.
You mean, you think you do? Is that it? You've put two and two together?
I know. Kitt didn't mention Paul's being there because she had a guilty conscience. She didn't dare let her husband, Bill, find out. Or anyone else. You see, Mr. McKillop, the house was leased in Paul Cromwell's name. He was paying the rent on the house she was living in. He was in and out of that house. It wouldn't make a very pretty story in court, it seems to me.
So that's it. And you say you know this for a fact? It could be proved according to your belief?
Yes, it could be. It already has been, by a firm of private investigators in Los Angeles, California.
A little while later, Jessie Calvert and Angus McKillop concluded their conversation, and Jessie walked home to Ben's luxurious house on 11th Street. As she paused on the broad front terrace of the house, she noticed the glow of a cigarette from the porch swing to her right. Now she walks on toward the swing.
Well, good evening, Kitt.
Good evening, Jessie.
Well, what are you doing out here in the dark? Gazing at the moon?
If you like. What were you doing roaming around town by yourself at this hour?
Oh, Went for a little walk. Why?
Seems an odd hour for exercise.
Well, it's only 10 o'clock.
Nevertheless, I'm sure Dad wouldn't approve. It's lucky for you he's over in Huntsville.
Since when have you taken such a burning interest in your father's welfare, Kitt? The last time we talked, you were absolutely furious with him. Oh, by the way, did you ever win that argument?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, yes, you do. The fight you two had because you want to leave town and take Ben's grandson with you.
He's not Dad's grandson. He's my son.
Well, for goodness sake, isn't it the same thing?
No, it isn't. There's a big difference.
Oh, don't tell me this is maternal pride.
Jessie, I came out here to be alone. So if you don't mind...
Oh, now calm down, Kid. Gracious. Your temper gets worse every day. And I think I know why now. I was puzzled for a while, but I'm not anymore.
You don't say.
I'm surprised Ben hasn't guessed by now why you've been in such a black mood these last months. Why you've been so nervous, frightened. Poor man. He's all confused about it, and yet the reason's so obvious.
Is it?
Why, certainly. It's all this business about the baby. Keeping custody. You know very well that Bill has a lot on his side. Only he doesn't know it. You're scared to death he'll find it out because if he did, it wouldn't take him long to get that court decision reversed.
You've got it all figured out, haven't you?
Yes, indeed I have. And I'm surprised Ben hasn't. Why, my goodness, if Bill handled things properly, he could have that child of his in no time at all.
You're hinting at something, Jessie. Pretending you've got something up your sleeve and you haven't a thing to go on. This is just another one of your bluffs.
Don't you wish it were, though? No, Kitt, I'm not bluffing. I know what I'm talking about.
Then what is it you know? That's what you want me to ask, isn't it?
Is there something to know, Kitt?
Oh, now you're changing your tune when I come right out and call your bluff.
No. But I have been thinking I ought to tell Ben anything I could, which might help him understand why you're in such a desperate frame of mind.
You tell Dad nothing. What I do is none of your concern, and I warn you,
Look,
Jessie...
Kitt, you're in no position to make threats. Can't you get that through your head? This is one time when I have the whip hand with you. In fact, I'm so very sure of myself that on second thought, I think I'll just wait.
Wait for what?
Oh, for things to work out, as I know they will. You can't keep up this deception much longer, my dear. Your little house of cards is just about to tumble around your ears. And if you'll forgive my mixing a metaphor, I think it's going to make a noise like thunder when it does. You know, I'm looking forward to that very much.
Yes, Jessie Calvert felt quite pleased with the way things were going. Kitt had always stood between Jessie and her husband, had done all she could to make Jessie's life miserable. And now, Jessie was confident she would see Kitt thoroughly defeated and disgraced. And Kitt was wondering, does Jessie know something? How could she have found out? Now for our story.
I hope Bill is still up. It's not very late. Well, if he's in bed, he'll just have to get up. I've got to talk to him tonight. Jessie's up to something. I can tell the way she talked just now. Wonder where she's been. Coming back at 10 o'clock looking so pleased with herself. She wasn't just out for a stroll. Not Jessie. She knows something, or thinks she does. But how could she? She can't know about the baby, that it's Lisa's. There's no way she could have found out. Unless Paul. When he was here. Maybe she ran into him. No, that can't be it. Jessie wouldn't have been able to keep it to herself all this time if she knew about that. And yet she's up to something. If only I knew what. Well, if she's been talking to Bill, I'll find out soon enough.
Kitt Calvert, frantically worried after a talk with her stepmother, Jessie, who returned from a secret meeting with Bill Meade's attorney, Angus McKillop. Jessie had looked triumphantly sure of herself, made vague, threatening insinuations which drove Ben's daughter to the verge of desperation. Now, Kitt pulls her car up before the little cabin her ex-husband occupies in Wakefield, and a few minutes later...
Kitt.
Yes, Bill. Well, don't stand there and stare at me. Let me in. I have to talk to you. You needn't look so glum, Bill. I'm quite aware that I'm not welcome. But I can't be bothered with social niceties at this point. I'm here, and you'll just have to stand me.
Well, I can't see what good it'll do. You're coming. But anyway, sit down.
Thank you. I don't want to. Bill, did you have a visitor tonight?
Well, how did you know?
So, you did. I knew it.
Okay, so I had a visitor.
And you talked about me.
Sure. Naturally we did, to a certain extent. That's logical, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Yes, of course you talk about me. Put your heads together to cook something up to ruin my life, anything. As long as you can get what you're after.
Kitt, what's the matter with you? Here, you sit down. I'll make a drink. You're hysterical.
Oh, hysterical, am I? Well, who wouldn't be? You and Jessie plotting together.
Jessie? What are you talking about, Kitt?
You're not going to deny it, are you? Because it's useless. I know very well she was here less than an hour ago.
Now, wait a minute, Kitt. If you're talking about Jessie Calvert, your stepmother...
How many Jessies do you think there are? There couldn't be two of her.
Well, if you think she's been here tonight, you're all wrong.
You mean... You haven't seen her?
Absolutely not. In fact, I haven't seen Mrs. Calvert for days.
Oh.
But anyway, supposing I had, what difference would it make?
Nothing, Bill, nothing. Maybe I was wrong.
After all, Kitt, we've got the divorce now. It seems to me you're more or less out of order questioning who I do or don't see.
That's just it, Bill. And that's the reason I came tonight. We have got the divorce, but you won't let well enough alone. They gave the baby to me.
Oh, I see. And you suspect Jessie of helping me. Well, you're wrong. But that doesn't mean I'm not trying to do something about it. I told you before, I've told you over and over. I want custody of my son, and I'm going to do all I can to get it.
But why, Bill, why? The child's well cared for. The nurse looks after him beautifully. What more can you want?
A lot more, Kitt.
But, Bill, you're so crazy, unrealistic. Just because you have some sentimental idea about your
Is
son...
it sentimental to want my child brought up in an environment of love? To teach him tolerance and honesty? Things he won't learn at your father's house. Kitt, you know what your father's like, what his influence would be. Well, you've told me yourself.
Bill, the last time we talked, I promised if you'd give up this idea of trying to take the baby away from me, I'd do anything you liked about his care. I told you I'd take him away from Dad's house, anything.
Yes, you talked about it.
I'll admit you're right about Dad. He is selfish, self-centered. He only cares about what he can get for himself. Heaven knows I realize that.
Well, at least I'm glad to know you realize it.
I do. That house is no place to bring up a baby. It's filled with bitterness and hate. Dad trying to prove to the world that he is somebody. Jessie hating him, hating me because we represent something in this town she always wanted and never can have. I know those things, Bill. I've always known them. But believe me, I promise I'll take the baby away.
No, Kitt. That isn't enough, just taking him away from there. Because, frankly, I don't trust you to do a good job of bringing the child up, even without your father's influence.
That's a fine thing to say to me. To say to your child's mother.
I'm sorry, Kitt. That's the way I feel.
Then you absolutely refuse to give up this idea of yours to reopen the case. Fight for custody.
Yes, I have to.
But, Bill, what makes you think you have a chance? What are your grounds? If McKillop's willing to take the case after losing once...
Well, at first he wasn't willing, but he's agreed to now.
Then he must think he has a chance of winning. But on what grounds? If the judge gave the baby to me before... Well, after all, nothing's changed since then. Or has it? What does he intend to do?
I don't know exactly, Kitt. But I've got a lot of faith in Angus McKillop. He knows what he's doing.
But you must know what grounds he intends to use. Oh, please, Bill, at least tell me that. I've a right to know.
I don't agree with you. Why should I tell you what our grounds will be? Surely you understand that.
No, I don't.
Well, I'm sorry. I have no intention of discussing it with you. It's my business and McKillop's.
There's only one reason you'd refuse to tell me. Because you're up to something. Something you've dug up and you're just waiting to spring on me when I'm off guard.
I'd hardly say you're off guard, Kitt. You seem to think I'm up to all sorts of skullduggery.
Well, I know you're planning something. And whatever it is, it's not fair, Bill.
Not fair? But do you honestly think you're in a position to talk about being fair after everything that's happened?
I don't understand you now, Bill.
You don't? That's funny. I never have understood you.
No, I mean, you've changed so.
Have I? How?
You're so hard, so cold. You didn't used to be like this. You were sympathetic. Even tender.
Well, perhaps I do seem hard and cold to you. What did you expect? Maybe you've forgotten what a beating you gave me. You know, a man doesn't go on taking it indefinitely. Sooner or later, something happens to a guy, and, well, he just decides he's not having any more.
But you don't care about anything but what you want now.
Oh, I'm not worrying about myself personally. It's what I want for my son. You ought to know that.
Oh, Bill. If you'd only be willing to give me this one last break. I know I've been wrong about a lot of things. But it's been difficult for me, too. And now, if you just let things drop, let me keep the baby. Bill, I promise you'll never have any more trouble with me. If you'll just do that one thing...
No, Kitt, you can't change my mind. What are you so worried about? It isn't as if I had much on my side except hope. Just because I've told you I'm not giving up.
That's it. If you're not giving up, it's because you know something or think you do. You're torturing me, just keeping me in suspense by holding it over my head.
I don't know what you're talking about, Kitt. If there's anything hanging over your head, I'm not responsible for it. There have been some funny goings-on, but I don't pretend to understand
what goings-on?
There's no use talking about it anymore, Kitt. We aren't getting anywhere. But you might as well accept it. I haven't changed my mind at all. I'm going to do everything in my power to get custody of the child.
No matter how much it might hurt me.
Well, somebody's bound to be hurt. But so long as it isn't my son, that's all I care about.
Yes, Bill. You're certain you have no doubts that you'd do anything you could to gain custody of your child. But perhaps Angus McKillop, your attorney, will tell you something that may change your mind. Because you do not suspect anything as damaging to the supposed mother of the boy you believe is yours as the new evidence Jessie Calvert has disclosed.